This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Education, climate change, childcare access, affordable housing. These are just a few of the issues the Vermont legislature has been working hard to address this legislative session. They started in early January, and now we're just a couple short weeks away from the end of the session. Last week, the Vermont House and Senate hit a big annual milestone. They agreed on a budget for the next fiscal year, which starts in July. That proposal is now with Governor Phil Scott for review. Joining us for the first portion of this hour is Vermont's State Senate President Pro Tem, Phil Baruth. He's a Democrat representing the Chittenden Central District. He was first elected to the Vermont State Senate in 2010. Senator Baruth, welcome back to Vermont Edition.
Good to be here, Michaela.
And if you have a question for Senator Phil Baruth or a comment, particularly around state spending or taxes, give us a call at 800-639-2211. You can also email the show at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. And we'll only be speaking with Senator Baruth for the next 15 minutes or so the time to reach out is now. All right, so Senator, the House and the Senate, as I just mentioned, have agreed on this big spending plan of just over $9 billion. And a committee has been hard at work whittling down that budget in the hopes of getting a signature from Governor Scott. For example, the budget's proposed base spending is $21 million less than the version the Senate passed at the beginning of May. Can you tell us about some of the ways that you cut spending?
Sure. What I would want people to understand first is that the budget grows every year. I think sometimes people tune into their televisions and they hear record amount of money being spent in Montpelier. But if you think about every expense you have, they all go up year after year. And so you're spending record amount for a house or record amount for a loaf of bread, et cetera. So, the $9 billion plus that we're spending this year is very much in line with what we spent last year and then add inflation on top of that. So the governor adds 3% inflation to his ask. So when it came to us, his ask was over $9 billion. As you pointed out, we cut about $21 million from our original budgets, and we also cut with that 10 or more positions for full-time employees in the federal government or in the state government. So with that said, we sent the governor something that was considerably cheaper and that was lighter on personnel, which he had asked for in his message to us, what we call the Dear Jane letter. And I'm hopeful that he'll sign it. The major place where we changed our minds in the Senate, if people will remember, a couple of years ago, we passed a historic child care bill. And along with that came a very small payroll tax to fund it. That was designed to bring costs down for parents, create more slots, and then make sure that child care providers earned more money. And that has been playing out. I'm very pleased with the way that bill is being implemented. With that said, the payroll tax was generating more money than we needed this year because the uptake of the program is still in process. So people are still finding out about it, applying for it.
They're using it a little bit less than the state thought that they would at this point.
Exactly. And so what the governor had proposed and the House would agree to was that we reduce the amount of general fund spending that we were kicking in, which we had promised we would spend the payroll tax plus $76 million in general fund to get parents and child care providers where they needed to be. But this year, it turned out we didn't quite need the $76 million. So the governor had proposed using less of that money and using that money elsewhere.
Hadn't Governor Scott proposed a zero rate increase to the subsidies?
Yes.
For child care providers, and this proposal, the House and Senate's budget still proposes raising that to 5%.
Yes. So what we were concerned with was that this would get to be a habit, that every year we would steal a little bit from the general fund transfer to childcare. So we put in language making sure that that's not the intention going forward. And then we agreed with the governor and the House that we could take a little bit of that money to make up the budget this year. So that was the major difference in general fund spending. As you noted, we did wind up with an additional 5% for infant and toddler care. They're the most expensive kids to take care of. So we strengthened the child care program, we like to think.
Okay. And that's still going to need the approval of Governor Scott, who proposed a 0% rate increase instead of a 5%. Can the state afford this?
Oh, yeah, I believe we can. The payroll tax that we put into place was less than 0.5%, and it's generating enough money. And as long as we remain true to our commitment to fund out of the general fund to the level necessary, we can certainly afford it. And what it's doing is paying lots of dividends for us in terms of how parents view us as a state that they would like to move to. So all of our rankings in terms of a great place to raise your family have skyrocketed since we put in place that child care initiative.
Well, let's talk a bit about how this budget could fill potential gaps caused by cuts to federal spending. There's a lot we still don't know right now about what's going to happen at the federal level. Congress is currently debating a federal spending program. They could cut things like SNAP benefits and Medicaid and other programs that are significant for Vermonters, but it's still very much a work in progress. Senator Baruth, can you tell us a bit about the legislature's plan to, I think it's to use revenue surpluses to plug some of those gaps?
Sure. This keeps all of us up at night, everybody in state government, but I know people around the state who are working with nonprofits or working in schools. There are hundreds and hundreds of federal grants that are now being threatened. And that's the calling card of the Trump administration, that everybody's money is threatened, and if you don't perform exactly as they demand, they will cut off that funding. It's called impoundment, and it's against, in my view, against both statute and the Constitution. But with that said, we're living in that world now. So what the budget does, first of all, we have topped off reserves of $100+ million. But additionally, we put in what's sometimes called a waterfall. So if we get more revenue than was predicted, 45 million of that will be put aside, and it'll be added to these other reserves. So we'll wind up with north of a couple of $100 million that can be used in an emergency. So only in an emergency would you touch those reserves. But let me give you such an emergency. If the current healthcare language that's in the House budget bill goes through, it would cut Medicaid for our poorest Vermonters drastically. And the choice then is either to let those people go without health care or to pick it up at the state level. And so we are, in the most responsible way that we can imagine, we are trying to prepare for that eventuality.
But that's whatever the state can put towards that, towards making up for the cuts to federal Medicaid funding. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, right? I mean, the amount that the federal government puts towards Medicaid is enormous, in the billions of dollars.
Right. And the bulk of that money, I have to say, ironically, will be cut from red states that voted for Donald Trump. For instance, Speaker Johnson, 40% of his constituents live on Medicaid. So these are people who have no problem turning around and, in effect, knifing the people who put them in power. So they have misplaced their trust. We're trying to protect our people to the extent we can. But you're right, we are not the federal government. We can't cover their commitments that we made when we expanded health care under Obamacare.
Let's speak a bit about the ways in which the state budget proposal and other legislation that's still under consideration right now addresses Vermont's shortage of affordable housing. And now I know that Governor Scott has pushed for more money for a program by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency that offers low-interest loans to developers who are building moderate-income rental housing. That is part of this state budget proposal, yes, but some of the governor's other requests around housing are not?
Well, we've got, as we always do with housing, we've got a number of must-pass bills that are moving outside the budget. So there are a couple of parallel bills, one from the House, one from the Senate, that are making the rounds. One of those will go through, and it'll have a variety of things, including what's called CHIP, which is a version of tax increment financing districts, but at a very small local level that will be essentially project specific. So it will allow rural communities that don't have a big tax base to get in the game in terms of putting more affordable housing on the table. So that's going to take a little work to get to an agreement between the House and the Senate. Governor's very much behind that. So my hope is that we'll have that. But just a couple of things I would mention. As always, we're putting millions of dollars into VHCB, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, millions into disability housing initiatives, and then Vermont Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, so that you can take an apartment, let's say, that needs an upgrade in order to bring it onto the rental market. You can get help with that. And the governor's been a big voice for expanding VHIP as we go along. So all of those funding sources together with money we got from the pandemic funding increases have produced, I would say, $1.5 billion plus for housing over the last 5 or 6 years. We're continuing that to the extent we can, but that ARPA money, the tsunami of money we got during and right after the pandemic is gone. So we're trying now to also make regulatory changes that will make it easier for housing to be built, especially in rural areas.
Well, let's take a caller here. We have Robin calling in from Williston. Robin, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I was curious about if there were provisions in this recent budget proposal to protect Vermont's judiciaries, one of the unsung heroes of our state government system, specifically things like the State Court Improvement Program or grants from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Are there plans in place to protect our judiciary if these grants are taken away?
Thank you.
Well, I would say we've been less worried about the judiciary as a whole suffering under, taking away federal grants. But they would come under the umbrella of those reserves that I mentioned. We have been funding what I think of as efforts to eliminate the backlog aggressively over the last 4 years. And we've continued that. So we've allowed funding for the upgrading of the judiciary's data system, their own kind of private data management system. And we've also added retired judges and other folks, along with, clerks and others, to help move the backlog along. But the judiciary is not immune, and no branch of local or state government is immune from those federal threats. And again, without putting too fine a point on it, that is the point. Donald Trump came into office. He raised tariffs globally so that everyone had to fear for losing their federal money. And he's doing the same thing to every state, every town, every municipality. And it's all about trying to pressure people to come into line with his vision of the world. And it's a shame, and it's something I lose sleep over, but the voters put him in office, and we have to deal as best we can with the situation.
Thank you, Robin, for calling in. If you'd like to learn more about the state of Vermont's judiciary, I'd suggest listening to a recent interview we did here on Vermont Edition with Vermont Supreme Court Justice Karen Carroll, who is stepping down from the bench to retire in August, and had some very interesting perspectives on ways in which the judiciary has changed over her career. Excuse me.
Michaela, could I just make one success story?
Sure.
Okay. The Vermont State Colleges, if you go back 6 or 7 years, they were looking at closing 3 of their campuses. It was a huge, huge issue. There was a convulsion, I would say, in the State House over that, because those campuses in Linden and Johnson and other places. They are the lifeblood of their communities, and they are job creators, and they offer the only higher ed in those areas. So we have been working for the last 5 years to fund a bridge formula that would transform the system. They unified it into Vermont State University. The results have been, I would say, very, very heartening. So their enrollments this year are up 15%. They are looking at a healthy path going forward. This year marked the end in the budget of our, really extraordinary relief to them. So we gave them the last installment of $5 million, as well as other monies that we had laid in for the transition. And we had a celebratory occasion in the Cedar Creek room, just marking that we didn't give up on higher ed. We didn't give up on those communities. We trusted them to transform, and they paid off.
Senator Baruth, are you saying we don't only have to talk about bad news on Vermont Edition? Confused.
In a subversive way, I slipped in some good news.
Well, thank you for that. I want to end on another important topic for Vermont's legislature and all politicians at this time, which is compromise, cross-party compromise. Sure. Governor Phil Scott came on Vermont Edition at the end of April, and during our interview, I brought up the fact that Republicans gained a larger foothold in the Vermont House and Senate after the last election. And I asked the governor if he felt the increase in Republicans on committees and such has led to more cross-party compromise and better legislative outcomes. Here's what he said.
I think having more Republicans on committees so they have a voice has been important. They've been put some in chair positions on the committees. I think that's been helpful. So I think overall, while I have to say that the majority has been struggling a bit with this new reality, at the same time, I think that we're moving in the right direction. And we'll see what happens over the next few weeks here, but at least we're speaking.
And when the governor there said struggling a bit with the new reality, I believe he was referring to the new reality of federal funding cuts and how they were going to impact Vermont. Senator Baruth, I'm just curious to hear what you think of the governor's comments there and generally what you think the impact of those last elections have been on the Vermont Senate, where Republicans gained 6 seats.
Well, one thing I will say is that Democrats, and I'll speak for the Senate, but I imagine the House would agree, we heard the message from voters absolutely loud and clear, which is that their property taxes were too high. I think it's hard beyond that to discern a clear message, but I think people would agree that that was the number one issue, and it was a dramatic result. So I came in committed to working with the governor on his major effort to bring down property taxes to near flat. And so he just yesterday signed the yield bill, which produces, as I heard on your newscast, a near flat rate of on average for Vermont communities. Yes. So that's relief that we delivered on in conjunction with the governor and Republicans. So that's, I think, a testament to the new version of the House and the Senate. Beyond that, I would say I have always worked very closely and really enjoyed my Republican colleagues. It is not like Washington. And if people are looking for something hopeful, I think we can take away the idea that Vermonters still work together, we still eat together, we still joke together, unlike what you see in the extreme polarization in Washington. That doesn't mean that sometimes we don't disagree, we do, but I think there's a collegiality in the State House now that I would point to. So we're all struggling under the Trump administration to keep the ship afloat, but I think we are agreed that we need to work together to make that happen.
Phil Baruth, a Democrat, is the president pro tem of the Vermont State Senate. Senator Baruth, thank you so much for your time and best of luck with the rest of the session.
Thank you, Michaela. We'll do our best.
We have to take a quick break. Coming up, we're going to hear about the last remaining large structure at the Vermont Yankee nuclear plant site and how it's about to come down. Learn more with us in just a minute on Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. More than 600 people once worked at the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant in Vernon. It produced about a third of the state's energy and was the state's largest power source. But a decade ago, it closed down. The decommissioning process has been complex and it's taken years, but it's about to hit a major milestone. In just a few weeks, the reactor building, the plant's last remaining large structure, will be demolished. Reporter Susan Small here with the Brattleboro Reformer has written many articles about the decommissioning process. She joins us now. Welcome back to Vermont Edition.
Good to be here, Michaela.
And listeners, you can join our conversation as well. Perhaps you live in or near Vernon. Have you been watching this decommissioning process at the former Vermont Yankee plant? You can give us a call at 800-639-2211. Now, Susan, before we get into the specifics of this whole decommissioning process, can you give us just the very basics on the Vermont Yankee power plant? Before it was shut down, back when it was in its heyday, what was going on there?
Well, it was generating a lot of electricity for people in Vermont. As you said, it was producing 1/3 of all the electricity used in the state. It was owned initially by a consortium of New England utilities, including Green Mountain Power and Central Vermont Public Service. And then in 2002, they sold it to Entergy Nuclear, which was a nuclear company based in Jackson, Mississippi, which in turn was a subsidiary of a big energy company in New Orleans, Louisiana. And during that whole history, Vermont Yankee was quite controversial. There were lots of demonstrations. There were a fair number of problems. One of the biggest, most visual problems was the partial collapse of Yankee's cooling towers, and that created a lot of public concern. There was a longstanding tritium leak at the plant, and that happened a couple of years, really, before it shut down. And it shut down in December, the last day of December 2014, though Entergy had announced its shutdown in 2013. And the shutdown, Entergy agreed to shut it down, decided to shut it down, not because of all the controversy, but because of economics, because natural gas was so inexpensive and electricity generated in New England by natural gas was undercutting the market for nuclear power.
So as you could tell from your recap there, Susan, decommissioning this power plant is a really complex process that takes years and years. I mean, case in point, I was looking at the last time you joined us on Vermont Edition, and that was in 2022 when the process hit another milestone. The final cask of high-level radioactive waste was being loaded up and taken away, and that was the first time the plant was completely free of radioactivity for the first time since it had opened. Have there been any issues in the demo process in the past few years since we spoke to you?
Not really. It's been surprisingly well run and no controversy, no violations cited by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which does regular inspections during the decommissioning process. The state is involved, but on the non-nuclear side. And even last week during the meeting of the Citizens Advisory Panel, the state said, they're not finding any unusual or unexpected issues of contamination, non-nuclear contamination, like spilled oil or that sort of thing. They are finding some examples of PFAS, which they think came from firefighting foam, because there were a couple of big fires at Vermont Yankee at their
PFAS,
transformers.
those are small plastic particles that are found in everything from your normal plastics to deodorant, shampoo. Yes.
Yeah. So No, it's been North Star. I mean, North Star got involved with Vermont Yankee, bought it from Entergy, and people were pretty skeptical that they'd be able to pull it off because they'd never decommissioned a nuclear power plant before, but they've really
Can't be that hard, right?
I wouldn't want to do it.
No, me neither.
But it was a demolition company. They would demolish these high, big structures in downtown Manhattan. But since now, they're getting into the decommissioning business of other nuclear reactors.
Well, let's take a call here. We have Bob in Rutland who's been waiting patiently on the line. Bob, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Small here. I'm going to say, what is the current status of that California company, back you mentioned 2022, Deep Isolation, that wanted to bury the leftover nuclear waste at the plant in a vertical tunnel a mile deep beneath the plant? And as things go, that's kind of a bad idea and a long list of mankind's bad ideas. But where's that status?
Thanks, Bob.
After I haven't heard a word about it, to tell you the truth. It's certainly nothing that's under consideration in Vermont. I mean, the nuclear fuel is still stored on site in Vernon in 58 casks, these big steel and concrete casks. And there's another cask that contains some really high radioactive components from the reactor building. But those casks, they're talking about opening interim waste storage above ground in either one is proposed in the state of Texas and one is proposed in the state of New Mexico. And those states are fighting those proposals, and those are tied up in the courts right now. So there's no fuel. There's deep isolation. I'm sure they're still researching it, but it certainly hasn't been discussed in Vermont.
Thank you, Bob, for your question. Susan, let's talk about this reactor building, which is pretty distinctive looking and is about to be torn down. Can you describe it for us?
Well, the reactor building is sort of the core of the nuclear power plant. That's where the reactor core was and where fission took place and where the spent fuel pool was located right next to the reactor core. And when Vermont Yankee was built, I've seen from historical photographs, they excavated like a couple of 100 feet down below, the ground to contain all the safety components needed for the reactor building. So, you look at the reactor building and it looks like a pretty simple metal structure, but, it has all these very heavy-duty, heavy reinforced safety structures. So tearing it down is not going to be a simple matter. And it's 5 stories tall. And so in order for them to access it, they built this earthen ramp up to the side of the building, and that's how they're going to actually start the demolition.
Wow, an earthen ramp. That sounds very rustic.
Well, it's gigantic, I would imagine. But so they're going to bring in, they were describing the North Star people were describing how they're bringing in special excavators to start, tearing apart the building, and that it's going to create a lot of waste, and the waste is going to be loaded onto rail cars and shipped to West Texas, which is where the low-level nuclear waste facility is located, where, Yankee was entered into a compact with the state of Texas for this waste facility. They entered into that compact, maybe 25 years ago. So this, planning for the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee has been going on for decades.
And when will it be over? Is there like a deadline where this will all be done?
Well, North Star is saying they plan to have the active decommissioning done by next year. And they really started in 2018, North Star did. Originally, the plant was going to be put into what was called safe store. That's an NRC term, and Entergy was just going to leave it there for about 60 years and then demolish it, which didn't please a whole lot of people. But that was perfectly legal. That was their option. And they said they needed to, just let it sit there while the decommissioning fund increased. But North Star came forward and said, we can do it quicker, cheaper, and immediately. Immediately meaning over, 7 or 8 years. After they get the turbine building down, then they have to restore the site. And even after they restore the site, as I said, the nuclear fuel is still there in a special facility called the ISFAC storage facility.
So is it too soon to start asking about the eventual future of this site? Do you know of any redevelopment studies that are underway?
Well, the town of Vernon certainly has been concerned about it and studying it. In fact, there was even a mention last week that North Star is looking into, because North Star will own the site. North Star is looking into some kind of battery storage facility because there's a big transmission yard right next to it that was rebuilt ironically, right before Vermont Yankee announced it was being shut down. So there's all this infrastructure that's right next to the plant. But the history of reuse of nuclear plants sites is pretty limited. So I think there's no real concrete plans, to tell you the truth.
We're not going to see a park and a playground and
a
school there anytime soon.
There's an elementary school that's basically right across the street from Vermont Yankee, the Vernon Elementary School. Yes, and that has remained throughout this entire process. So yes.
Well, Susan, before I let you go, I just wondering if you could tell us how long you've been covering Vermont Yankee and this story for. I mean, you must have enough experiences there and information to fill a book.
I used to work for the Rutland Herald, and one of my first assignments for the Rutland Herald was covering a big demonstration at Vermont Yankee in 1979, where I think 160 people were arrested for demonstrating, basically blocking the gate at Vermont Yankee. And this was after 3 Mile Island. I think it was 2 years after 3 Mile Island down in Pennsylvania. So there was a lot of heightened anxiety about the safety of nuclear power at that point. So there were a lot of coverage of demonstrations at Vermont Yankee for sure. Yeah. The last big demonstration at Vermont Yankee, I think, was in 2012.
And you've been there, witnessing it.
I have.
Susan Small here with the Brattleboro Reformer. Thank you so much for joining us and for your expertise on this subject.
Certainly. Thank you.
Well, we have to take one more break here. When we come back, a Lincoln-born ultra runner is going to reflect on her mother's legacy with us and the role of the Vermont City Marathon in both of their lives. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Every Memorial Day weekend, more than 5,000 runners come to Burlington for the Vermont City Marathon and Relay. It's a beloved annual tradition for many local runners, like Emily Halnan. Her mother, Andrea Halnan, was a teacher in Addison County for more than 40 years. She also ran, biked, and ate maple creamies all over the state. Andrea ran the Vermont City Marathon when she turned 50. It was her first marathon, and watching her mother complete it inspired Emily to try running a marathon herself. Andrea Halnan died of a rare uterine cancer in 2020 at the age of 66, but her legacy continues to inspire Emily to run and be active in nature to this day. She tells her and her mother's story in her debut memoir, To the Gorge, which came out last year and was named a USA Today bestseller. Emily lives in Eugene, Oregon, but she was born and raised in Lincoln, Vermont, and she'll be speaking in Burlington on Sunday as part of a Vermont City Marathon event. Emily, welcome to Vermont Edition.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm so happy to be here. And quick correction, I'll be speaking on Saturday because on Sunday, people will be very busy running the marathon, and I want them to have all the space in the world for that.
Yes. Okay. Saturday, the talk. Sunday, the running occurs. So
exactly.
In your book, Emily, To the Gorge, you went after the speed record on the Oregon Pacific Crest Trail, which is a 460-mile stretch of trail. Tell us why you chose to do this activity and well, activity I feel like is not the right word for it, but take on this enormous challenge and how you felt it connected you to your mother.
Yeah, exactly. My mom was every reason I did it. So as you said in your wonderful intro, my mom decided to run her first marathon after she turned 50. And my mom was not a runner for most of my upbringing and childhood. She wasn't even active. She had a health scare when she was in her mid to late 40s when she had to have her gallbladder removed. And that really moved her to want to add physical activity to her life. And that started with walking. And then that turned into running 5Ks. And then that turned into running her first marathon when she turned 50, which, as you said, just left me extraordinarily inspired by my mom and left me wanting to run a marathon myself. And that was the start of my running story. And I got totally hooked on the sport. And my mom kept doing bigger and bigger things with her own athletic endeavors. She went on when she turned 60. She loved these milestone years. She decided to do her first triathlon. At the time, she didn't know how to swim, so she had to learn how to swim to do that.
That's amazing.
It was so amazing. She went to, the pool all throughout the Vermont winter, which is not what I want to do during a Vermont winter. Learned how to swim, got herself through that first triathlon, kept going. She went skydiving that same year to celebrate her birthday. And then when she was diagnosed with cancer, she lived with cancer for 13 months, and she continued to insist on living in her same really wholehearted, bold, brave, beautiful way. And, she of course felt how dark cancer was, and she was a woman who loved the heck out of life. So, she felt the grief of being diagnosed with such a grim diagnosis, but she continued to live in a really beautiful way. And seeing her go through that and all of these other things that she had done when she did pass away in January 2020, I just felt really moved to want to do something to celebrate my mom and celebrate the way she had lived. And obviously that couldn't be a small thing. It had to be a big Andrea Howland kind of thing. And running across the state of Oregon and trying to do it faster than anyone else checked all the right boxes for me. And so that was what I settled on doing. And it also, because running had been something we shared for years and years and years and was really a love language between us, it really also gave me a way to stay close to my mom through the hardest stretches of grief. So that was why I decided to do it.
Emily, when you were running, I wonder, I'm curious about the ways in which running these extreme distances helped you either connect with your grief, like really focus on it as you had all of this time alone simply with yourself, your thoughts, and your body, or was it more of a way to kind of give yourself some space from that grief because you were so focused on the physical task at hand?
I think it was a lot of things, Michaela. I think running helped me with grief in so many ways. I think for starters, grief is such a physical sensation. I mean, it certainly was for me. I felt like, my heart had like physically shattered into shards of glass when I lost my mom, and I would get these, just pounding headaches. And instead of letting it sit there and fester, having a way to move with it really, I think, helped me work through that really hard stretch of grief. I think also, I love that we're talking about this right before the marathon, because I think we live in a society where we're really not encouraged to be openly talking about our hardest emotions. Like I had a very traditional cubicle job when my mom was diagnosed, and I had a lot of days where I was running to the bathroom or biting my lip in meetings to hide my emotions. And I think running, especially long distance events, is a space where people aren't really hiding their emotions. They're feeling them in a real honest way. And I think if you go watch the marathon, which everyone should do on Sunday, like if you go to mile 22, you won't see people faking their way through what they're feeling. You'll see
Yeah.
them, very openly sharing how they're feeling. And for me, I think running feels like a place where I'm like a snake shedding my skin and I can just feel my raw emotions. And so it was so valuable to be able to do that, to be able to really access how I was feeling, especially when I was trying to navigate all these spaces where I didn't feel like I had that ability. Um, and then it was also like running for me as a real source of joy. And I don't know if it was a distraction so much as it was a complement to grief. I think like being able to feel like feeling joy through our hardest things, I think is so important. And so I think having a space that allowed me to access something I loved really helped buoy me through
Mm.
grief as well.
Well, as you mentioned, your mom had a community of people who really loved her here in Vermont and
Hmm.
was a teacher here for more than 40 years. And I'd
Hmm.
invite our listeners, if you knew Andrea Hallinan, to call in and perhaps share a memory with us at 800-639-2211. Or if you don't get a chance to do so by the end of the hour, you can always email us at Vermont Edition and at vermontpublic.org, and we'll pass along those thoughts to Emily. Emily, you ran parts of the Vermont City Marathon course with your mom and your brother. Is that right?
Hmm.
Can you tell us what
Hmm.
what you like about the course and this race and relay experience?
Oh, everything. I mean, I think in my road running days, I went on to run over 20 marathons, and I still think Vermont City Marathon is like the best marathon out there.
That's so many
Um,
marathons. That's very impressive.
the Howland women got very into running. Yeah, I mean, I think like, Vermont is a place that really embraces community.
Oh, we might have lost you there,
Vermont
Emily.
City Marathon, and
Oh, sorry,
oh,
Emily. We just lost you for just a moment there. Could you
am,
restart where you were talking about
am
how?
I still here?
Yes, we can hear you. Could you restart where
Yeah,
you're saying
great.
about how Vermont embraces community?
Yeah, so I think Vermont's a place that really embraces community, and I think the Vermont City Marathon is a display of that. And I remember going to the Vermont City Marathon just to watch it way before anyone in my family was even thinking about taking a step of running, because I think it's just such an event that people like to participate in any way and celebrate. And so I think there's so much to love about it. And the course, travels by so many beautiful parts of Burlington along the lakefront, and the taiko drummers on the hill. I feel like my body still responds to that drum beat in my head of helping you charge up the hardest part of the course. But for my family, it was so special because it was my mom's first marathon. It later was my brother's first marathon, and we all ran bits of it together. One year I ran the full marathon while my mom and brother ran the relay together, and so we all got to have a big Howland party all over the marathon course. And so I have a lot of special running memories at the Vermont City Marathon, and I think yeah, I think people can get into it whether or not they uh, care at all about running themselves. I think it's just a really beautiful display of humans doing something really awesome and incredible.
And you told me when we first spoke that you and your mother did the Marine Corps Marathon together in Washington, D.C., and she beat you, right?
Oh, she did. Yes. Yeah. The Marine Corps Marathon was my first marathon. It was on my 23rd birthday, and my mom, of course, wanted to do it with me. She was on her fourth marathon at the time. And I think, as I told you before, she was, so much wiser and experienced in these events. And she gave me some really great motherly advice before the start, and I didn't listen to it. One of her greatest tips was to not go out too fast because you have 26 miles to run and you need to pace yourself in a smart and sustainable way. And I went out very fast, and that felt really good for like, 1, 2, 3, 4 miles. And in my head, I was just like, I am incredible. I was born to run marathons. And then I hit what runners refer to as the wall, where you feel like you can't take another step around mile like 12. And you don't want to hit the wall like ever, and hopefully not until like mile 24 at least. And I hit it miles and miles before that. And around that time, I saw my mom go running confidently by. And because the Marine Corps Marathon is such a huge event with 30,000 runners and tons of spectators, she didn't see me. And then I started crying to her like a small child, just, Mom, please, Mom, save me. And she couldn't hear me. And she just kept running. And she beat me to the finish by 20 minutes. And I love that my mom beat me by 20 minutes in my first marathon. I think that's so fun.
Oh, that's a great
It speaks
story.
to how incredible she was. Yeah.
Well, one of the other aspects of your mom's sort of athletic journey that spoke to me so much was the fact that, as
Mhm.
you mentioned, she wasn't a runner and she made herself into one. From starting out going on long walks
Mhm.
to eventually running multiple marathons. Same thing with becoming a triathlete, starting with learning how to swim.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you might have any advice for folks listening who have long thought about doing a marathon or another long running race, but have also felt like the barrier to entry is so high.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I really appreciate about my mom when I look back at how she did these things was that she didn't talk herself out of them, that she really left the door open to possibility. And I think that's one of my biggest pieces of advice for people is to leave the door open to possibility. And I think we can find, like, when I thought about running 460 miles across Oregon, which was so much longer than anything I'd ever run, I had a million reasons to convince myself that I was not the person to do that. But I decided to do what my mom did and to find a reason to try and to go toward possibility instead of shutting it down. And I think that taking that invitation, you can really discover a lot about what you can do, even if you find it hard to believe. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about running is it's such a powerful way to explore what you can do and to surprise yourself with how strong and capable you are. And I mean, I think like getting into it to my another really big piece of advice I would have is to find some way to make it fun. Like my mom had a lot of friends that she would walk and run with. And, she mentioned Maple Creamy. She did lots of things like plan bike rides or runs around bakeries she loved, or just like, listening to the music you love, like just finding some way to make it fun. So you want to do it. I think also do it in a place that you love. Like that, I think can be a really helpful tool.
Mm. Emily, you went after the speed record on the Oregon Pacific Crest Trail. Again, it's a 460-mile stretch of trail. Did you achieve that record, or is it giving away the book to say that on air?
It's funny. I wrote a book that like the ending before you start reading it, but hopefully
Right.
I wrote it in a way that you still want to keep turning the pages. I did. I ended up getting the overall record, beating both the women's and men's time that stood at the time. And finished it in 7 days and 19 hours and 22 minutes or something, which was about 60 miles a day through the mountains of Oregon.
Congratulations. What an incredible
Thank you.
accomplishment.
Thank you, Michaela.
And
Thank
then
you.
briefly, you'll be speaking, as we said, at the marathon on Saturday ahead of the marathon on Sunday as part of this new speaker series. Could you tell us about it?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll be speaking at noon at the DoubleTree, and I'll be joined by Vermont trail runner Eliza LaPierre, and I'll be doing kind of a talk, and then we're calling it a trailside chat without minus the trail, and then we'll do audience Q&A, and Phoenix Books will have books there, and I'll be signing them, and I hope that runners and non-runners all get something out of it, and especially that anyone who's doing the marathon on Sunday gets a little something they can use to help them through the run.
Emily Halnan is a writer, trail runner, and mountain athlete born and raised in Vermont, now living in Eugene, Oregon. She'll be speaking about her memoir, To the Gorge, and the legacy left by her mother, Andrea Halnan, on Saturday ahead of the Vermont City Marathon on Sunday. Emily, thank you so much for joining us and for telling us about your mom.
Thank you, Michaela. I really appreciate having this space to do that.
Well, that is all the time that we have for Vermont Edition today. As always, you can weigh in on our show or pitch us ideas by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Our show was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Today's call screener was Rick Barrett, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.